The activity is really about kind of thinking about your interpretive content planning. I'd say it's probably fair to say that all of our emphasis here is much more on the content and the experience design than the technology. I mean, we can talk about the technology. My personal view is that's kind of the easy bit, and the bit that perhaps it's harder to focus on, and most often we see perhaps neglected a little bit, is really thinking deeply about the content and experience design, and in particular what the current generation of technology affords that perhaps was not available to us in the past, which I think demands some slightly different thinking about content than perhaps what a lot of our museum visitors are used to. So that was kind of the sense of where we were. We could also actually just sit here and do questions and answers. I've done workshops before where that's really what people wanted to do because they had very specific projects they were working on or specific questions about how to get started with mobile. And so you've got, I don't know, several decades of mobile experience here you can tap into if you'd rather do it that way. But why don't we just pause there and maybe kind of do a quick ask each of you very, very quickly, obviously, because there's a fair number of us and we don't want to spend all morning introducing ourselves, but I think as this is a workshop, really rather than just a series of lectures, it's probably useful that we know each other, we know who's in the room. So if we could kind of start here and just say who you are, where you're from, and maybe a word about what you were hoping to get out of the workshop, and I'll take some quick notes as you do that. Please go ahead.
I'm Jacopo. I work here in Florence in the Museum Galileo, and I coordinate the work of the multimedia department inside the museum. And I'm here because we already developed a video guide in 2010, but now we have to renew it, and so I'm here to get some new ideas.
Okay. So you've already got some experience, and you're just hoping to kind of build on that.
Yes.
All right.
I'm Ed, I'm a student and I'm currently researching in mobile and museums, so I'm just kind of there to see what problems you guys are facing and build that into my research.
So this is more for research than practical application.
Hi, I'm Paolo. I'm the head of the Internet and Interactive Media Department of the Museo Nazionale della Scienza e Tecnologia Leonardo da Vinci di Milano. I have different projects related with mobile application going on at this moment, so I think in the next month there will be a lot of decisions I will have to take, so this is a place for me to be.
Okay.
I'm David. I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm going to write my PhD thesis about the mobile, and especially about the content, how it is created, and what can we learn from it. How, for example, how can we reinforce or enhance the visitor's experience or the flow experience? So that's
Okay. Maybe we should just come up here and catch up at the front. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Philippe Stradlin from Ghent, Belgium, and I work for the STOM Ghent City Museum. We have an audio tour in the museum, and we're thinking about making a tour in the city as well that's linked to our museum. So I'm glad to work here.
Oh, okay, that's great. Because Ilaria's been mentioning as well. They've been doing city tour things. Fantastic. Do you want to?
I'm Priscilla. I'm also a student, so it's also for research. I'm focusing on digital tours as a heritage learning strategy, and coming from a university in Amsterdam.
Which one?
Landmark Academy.
I'm Centro also from the University of Arte. I'm researching mobile museums and focusing on the distance attention, how they switch from mobile to artifact and
That's an interesting question.
I'm going to deal with a lot.
I'm Angela. I'm a research fellow at the University of Salerno. I'm an archaeologist, but now I'm working in the ICT department of the University of Salerno. We have some projects about museums and archaeological sites, and I'm interested in mobile technologies and content. I'm an archaeologist, so technology is another fit for me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Federica, and I'm a student. I'm studying economics here in the university, and we are working here this day.
I'm a student of Professor Toschi in the University of Florence, and I'm preparing my final work in the second graduation. So I'm studying about mobiles in museums and new technologies in museums.
I'm Ren, I was doing a stage last year in the community of Firenze, and I'm here for a help in the organization.
I am Mercedes. I have had a degree on history of art, and also I have read new stages of education. I have a Bradburne.
Hi, I'm Davide. I'm a consultant and a software developer. So I'm particularly interested in mobile tools, how you can make a really entertaining mobile tool.
Hello everybody, I'm Ricardo, I'm an engineer. I'm a PhD student at the University of Modern Media. I work in the field of geomatics, and I'm here to know some new technologies about museums and mobile tours and so on.
Hi, my name is Espen Svensson from the City Museum of Bergen in Norway, and we've been tasked with developing a mobile tour for a historic area of the city.
My name is Ilaria. I'm working at the Hanseatic Museum in Bergen, and I'm working with Espen here.
Hi, I'm Dada. I'm an Arte. I'm a PhD student at Cultura and interested in museology and museography, so this is an opportunity to improve my knowledge.
Hi, I'm Carmen. I'm a teacher of art history, and I do my PhD on virtual museums.
Would you mind saying just a word about the connection in your mind between mobile and virtual museums?
No?
How do you connect mobile to virtual museums?
When I study virtual museums, I've make a list of the apps they have, and I use mobile devices with my students when we visit museums when there are so resources.
Okay, hi, I'm Claudia, a German art historian. I worked in a research institute in Rome called Biblioteca Hertziana in the publications department. Now I'm freelance doing editorial projects and communication strategies for cultural institutions. So mobile tours make part of these strategies, obviously.
Raphael Sandoval. I'm the IT manager for the Director of History and Heritage, which is the organization of the Canadian Armed Forces that supports the 70 museums that belong to the Canadian Armed Forces. This is Catherine. She's here purely out of interest. Sorry?
Oh no, sorry, okay. I lost track of my rows.
Hi, I'm Marco from Fabbrica Ludens, a spin-off company of the Bruno Kessler Foundation Research Institute of Trento. We have realized a new generation of handheld guides, and we also provide mobile tools for cultural heritage.
Hi, I'm Benedetta, and I work at Palazzo Strozzi Foundation. I'm an interaction designer, and we aim to develop a wonderful application for Palazzo Strozzi, so I'm here to inspiration.
I'm Paolo Brunelli. I'm an ICT consultant. I'm here to understand how to bridge the gap between mobile technology that I consider quite mature and attractive, people involving storytelling solutions that I think are not really here.
No problem. Just see. All right, that was the last person of the original crew. Would you like to introduce yourself? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Victor Fancelli. I'm a student of literature, and I started working for the Museo de la Ciencia in Barcelona, so the Science Museum in Barcelona, and we are not exactly doing apps, but things with mobiles and especially directed to kids and teenagers. And I want to know more about all these things and what's going on, and I think that's the reason I'm here.
And those of you who just arrived, welcome. Would you like to just introducing ourselves very briefly and kind of saying why, what we're interested in getting at and why we're here?
Well, I work at the University Polytechnic of Milan, and we are developing some kind of game experience using an application for students to be, involved in learning. I work at design school, so try to learn design culture and spread all these kind of things, so the students could learn playing this kind of seriously applications to be involved better in our work, our design culture work.
Okay.
I work in the Museum of the National Library of Spain, and we have many of these things, and I think it's quite important. The museum is quite new, but we would like to have some of this for disability, different languages, and so on.
I'm Dennis Palazzo. I had a presentation on the first day of the meeting about mobile technology and museums from a design perspective, because I come from the design department of Polytechnic of Palazzo. And so I've been involved for several years till now in working with mobile technologies and museums and city for tourism and leisure. And I'm involved especially in gameplay and gaming and gamification for cities and culture.
Let's see. Who else we got? Yeah.
See, perhaps you may know me. I'm Valentina Zucchi. We met in the first day for the mobile tablet for the Santa Maria Novella Church and Complex. I work at the Florentine Civic Museums. We are the news association, and we basically work to promote culture in any way, and technology can be one of the best ways.
Great. And we're just introducing ourselves and saying something very briefly about why we're here and interested in mobile.
My name is Maria Rosaria Paliva, and I work for Fondazione Sistema Toscana in Florence, and my first project, my main project, is to organize an international festival in Pisa, which takes place in Pisa in October. So the museum and web is one of our 8 items during the festival.
Okay, great. Did we get everybody? Great. Okay, I'm just going to count the empty chairs and let our registration person know, because there were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 empty chairs in the room, more or less, because apparently people were still signing up at the last minute. So I'll just let them know.
8.
And is everybody staying for the tour afterwards? The fonts in the text might have gone a little squiffy because we moved from a Mac to a, let's see, there's a little difference. some of yours, or should I do the introduction?
No, I think you should do the intro. I'm going to do something very philosophical, it will disappoint you all, about the nature of this whole business. So no, I think you should do the intro. I'm just going to watch it somehow. If there's a spare seat, I think.
Okay. So, well, there's one right here. Anyway, make yourself comfortable. Hi, welcome. Just so you know, we did a quick round. There's several empty seats. Yeah, we just finished a quick round of introducing ourselves and kind of saying why we're here, what we're kind of hoping to get out of it. So if you want to just jump in quickly and introduce yourself.
Can you repeat that?
Can you just say who you are and why you're here?
Okay. I am a collaborator of Duro Workshop, and I work in the marketing area.
Okay, good.
Olivia Fazzi.
Candice Chenu, I'm project manager leader for learning and information in Musée du Quai Branly in France.
Hi, Harold Way. I work for a subtitle company which is involved in accessibility as well.
Okay.
And so.
Good, glad to hear that. Okay, so I'm just going to kick us off with some very basic questions, but I don't know, sometimes I find if you return to the basic questions, you discover that they're more complex than thought. So, what is mobile in museums? It sounds like we've got a pretty high level of mobile experience among the group here. Can you just kind of throw out, when you think about mobile in museums, what comes to mind in terms of experiences, content, devices? Just feel free to shout out a few things. We won't belabor the point first. See what comes to top of mind. Yes, please.
People receiving information, so with text or audio, and going in the museum and seeing something, and at the same time receiving more information with text or audio. I think, or sometimes there is also like an image, like a map, to get orientation for that.
Okay, so interpretive content delivery, maybe also services like navigation. Okay, anybody else?
I think we have to understand what is mobile for persons today, and then we can understand what mobile can become for a museum.
Very nice.
That's a key problem, because I think that mobile are a sort of identity manager for each of us. These are becoming such a thing, and so, involvement in culture is quite still to be understood area.
Right, please.
Maybe lifelong learning, because for me, for example, I used a lot the internet for learning something that it wasn't at disposal in school texts. So maybe mobile in museum may be used like this if the museum creates good content for learning.
Really nice. So supplementing what's immediately available, and would you include in that things like going to Wikipedia, Googling, so maybe going beyond what the museum's providing?
Yeah, but the problem is that Wikipedia is a bit unknown about who's writing. If I could have a Wikipedia that is written by a museum that gives me the sureness that the content I read is correct, I say, if I read it here, I'm sure. Because many times I go to Wikipedia and read it, and after I say, no, there was an error, my gosh. And I realized that this error, I have put it in my work, and it made problems.
Okay, so I could make a sarcastic comment about museums never getting it wrong. But I mean, I think you raise a really important point, which is about the trust that people have in museums as brands, and it also touches on, obviously, this question of crowdsourcing, which we had a wonderful conversation about yesterday in the conference. Anybody else want to throw anything out? These are wonderful, wonderful perspectives.
I can't avoid thinking in obsolescence.
What, sorry?
Obsolescence.
Obsolescence.
Yes.
Ah, interesting. Please come on in.
Good morning.
Please.
I would say it would be interesting to attend mobile museums also in terms of relation with history of the place where you are, the relation with the artists, and then of course the relation with the territory.
Okay, so not just kind of points of interest in objects, but a larger ambient background. All right, let me just plunge ahead. I mean, these are all great, and I think none of this will come as a surprise to you. I mean, today, this slide is going to be very wrong, I can tell in the format already, but things, when we talk about mobile, of course we mean things that are small, we can put in our pockets like smartphones or traditional audio tour devices, even gaming devices, but also smartphones, which run not just apps, but also mobile web. And I think particularly a few years ago when people were starting to think about the new generations of mobile in museums, they really thought about apps. I've been really pleased to see many more museums using mobile web to great advantage as well. Podcasts. So this is perhaps a kind of an intermediate generation between the traditional audio tour and the smartphone app, downloadable content, be it audio or video or other. We mean both people bringing their own device and also devices that are loaned out on site. This is going to be all scary. In addition to the kind of pocketable devices, we've got portable ones. So like these little guys, which are a little bit too big to fit in your pocket, and yet we see an increasing number of visitors to museums and other cultural sites holding up their iPads to take photos, for example. And I think it's important not to forget about dumb phones, which, okay, they're a dwindling minority of the mobile devices that are available to consumers, but still a significant proportion of the world is really on a feature phone or even a phone that just makes calls and sends text messages. And there's still some interesting things that can be done with those platforms. And of course, other sorts of downloadable content like PDFs and ebooks as well. And actually, the final point is one that I think is only just now kind of starting to sink in with a lot of museums. The huge number of people who are coming to their website from mobile devices, and that website was not designed for mobile devices, so it's not responsive, but people are doing it anyway because they need to find out the opening hours or whatever on the fly. And we're seeing in the US at the moment, upwards of 40% of web traffic to museum websites now is coming from mobile devices. So I think what's starting to happen is that the very meaning of web, what the internet experience is being conditioned by the frequency of that experience happening through a small screen, portable or pocketable device. So really what we mean when we think of website is starting to shift as a result of the impact of mobile on culture. So I thought I would just show this wonderful video. Let's see if I can manage to do this. Has anybody ever seen this video before? Did you recognize that image? Yes? Have you seen one of my presentations or from Loic Tunnel? Yeah? Oh, that's right, yeah. So this is a favorite of mine. So this is a video of the earliest audio tour that we seem to have, that we found a video of so far. It's from 1953. Loic Talon found it doing some research online in the archives of the State Museum in Amsterdam. So, it's fascinating. You think this is not that long after World War II, and this is what museums are doing with new mobile technologies of the day.
Dit is geen bijeenkomst van hardhorenden, maar deze mensen zijn bezoekers van het Amsterdam Stedelijk Museum, die volgens een zeer moderne methode worden rondgeleid. Via een hoorapparaat krijgen ze uitleg en worden ze gedirigeerd naar de verschillende kunstwerken.
I don't speak Dutch, so I'm going to provide my own voiceover. One of the things I love, you see the technology in the background, it's reel-to-reel tape broadcast, so everybody's hearing the same content but in their own language at the same time. So there's a whole kind of server and control center, if you will. Believe it, using not sure if it's the PRF, but they're running the broadcasting to the galleries. So they had to add special cabling. These are the receiver devices. Some same issues we're facing today. Head hygiene for headphones. How do you hand them out? Or as the head of operations at M10 Audio when I worked there said, I can hand out as many of those newfangled devices as you want. It's getting them back that's the challenge. This technology was actually originally developed for accessibility in theaters. So you remember in the 40s and 50s and even before, people would go to the cinema to get the news. So they would watch newsreels. And there was a recognition that for people who were hard of hearing or had some sort of hearing loss, they may not be getting the audio well. So this radio technology was designed to bring the audio closer to their ears, and then was adapted by the Stately Museum for the museum visit. And they really wanted to address multilingual interpretation. That's really the origin of mobile museums. It's in many ways started with thinking about visitors who don't speak the native language of the museum. And I find it very interesting that it also sort of started with this technology for accessibility. So what I like to do with this is just, again, ask what are some of the kind of adjectives you would use? How would you describe that experience, that mobile experience you just saw in the museum? You've played this game before, so you're welcome to lead off if you'd like. Please go ahead.
Well, it's not interactive.
Not interactive.
Mostly not interactive.
Okay. Yeah.
On the other hand, it's kind of social. It's a group because everyone is hearing the same thing at the same time.
Same time. Okay. Yeah. Good point. Anybody else?
It's not a personal experience.
Oh. Why do you say that?
Because people move, follow the speech. So it's not a personal thing that a person could choose what he wants to see, what he wants to learn, and probably is not able to, let's say, share, for example, something he is experiencing in that moment with other people. That could
other than the person next to him. Yeah.
Could have some interest,
right.
and probably share something.
Okay.
Opinions or
okay.
nothing else.
And it's
so,
limiting to a certain degree.
Limiting? Sorry, who's speaking?
Well, because everybody will interpret it differently, right? And look at it from a different perspective. But as soon as somebody introduces the idea or places that thought into their hearing, that will limit that imagination.
Is that a property of mobile?
No, I think in general it's just a social a part of society. But I think in terms of the individual's experience, depending on the individual, that may hinder or it may improve. I'm not saying it's pro or con, but I think it'll depend on the individual.
Right. Okay. There are 2 seats here, one there. And James will, so there we go. So we're full, but nobody else knows. Okay, so I guess the point that I want to make with this video is that, I mean, absolutely everything that you've said is true. It's kind of a group experience. Everybody gets the same content that might kind of prejudice their experience in some way. It's not interactive. But I want to argue that none of that has to do with the technology. Yes, this is an extremely primitive, if you will, radio broadcast technology. But we could have imagined a very different experience. We could have seen a very different kind of experience of the mobile tour in this museum if the content had been designed differently. So for example, even though everybody's hearing the same content at the same time, if the message had been, okay, we're going to talk about palette in this artist's work today. This is actually an exhibition about fake Vermeers. It was called Fake or Real. So we're going to analyze whether these are fakes or real on the basis of palette. So everybody, go look around the gallery, note down the colors that you're seeing used. You know, come back to the middle in 5 minutes, and we'll all talk about your view of which are the true colors of Vermeer and which are the fake colors of Vermeer. So even though everybody would have heard that same message, because the message encouraged a much more interactive and a much more individual kind of experience, we would have seen a very different behavior from the visitors. So that's really, in some ways, if you only take away one thing from this workshop, what I'd like for you to remember is at the end of the day, it's really not about the technology. It's really about what you're doing with the content and the experience design, because even with the most primitive technology, you can go against the grain and create experiences that, as you said, I think very, very rightly, are more congruent with how people are using mobile today anyway, and therefore don't seem such a kind of a departure. You know, why should I have to leave my Web 2.0 life at the door of the museum when I walk in? Feel free to, disagree. This is supposed to be a workshop and therefore interactive. But one of the things that we've seen through the ages of mobile in museums is that there is a tendency, both on the part of the museums and the providers, the mobile companies that work with them, to let the technology condition the experience and the content. So in the early days, of course, after the kind of radio broadcast, one of the first really personal mobile, lightweight mobile technologies that was used in museums was the Walkman. So you're talking about cassette tape. So a very linear experience. You could hit play and then follow along. The introduction of the digital player with a keypad really constituted a major shift in content and experience design in mobile, because museums and content developers could then go from these linear experiences to allowing random access. So the visitor could decide where they went, what they listened to, in what order. And this was seen as a kind of a liberation. But what it meant was that we also lost that linear soundtrack, that ability to know what people had listened to before when they were hearing about this painting by David. Did they even know who the hell Napoleon was? Had we told them yet or not? This is a solid-state CD-ROM player that, again, introduced another kind of major transformation, because the first digital players were very limited in memory. Memory was very expensive. Whereas the solid-state CD-ROM and then further digital developments allowed multiple languages and lots of content to be stored on the same device. So suddenly visitors could come to the museum, could come to a place like the Louvre or to the Rijksmuseum and say, I speak French, I speak German, I speak Russian, and everybody gets the same device, but all the content and the languages are stored on one. And then from there, we just went into a series of miniaturization, smaller, lighter, more powerful, greater memory capacity, greater battery capacity, etc., in terms of the made for museums proprietary devices. But again, what we really want to, I think, focus on today is how we can get away from the technology dictating the kinds of content and experiences that we create. This is a slide that I have a personal game I play when I present. I try always to include this slide to find some logical way to weave it in. And this is our good friend Norbert Kantor, who sent it to me from 2003 from an exhibition in Bonn, Germany, where they were using kind of a radio technology, and the visitors had to wear antennae on their head. This was the first generation. The second generation, the antennae looked like Christmas trees. So again, if we forget that it's not about the technology, I think what we end up tending to do is turning our visitors into sort of cyborgs. And they look very silly, and we look even sillier. Okay, so now this, let's see, is this computer connected to the internet? It should be. Okay, so we will find out. This is a video that MoMA made. Okay, it's trying to go. Has anybody ever seen this video before? I see. It's not essential that we see it if for some reason this won't load, but I do recommend you look at it. You can find it on YouTube. It's called I See. And it describes a mobile experience in MoMA, in a museum, which isn't actually technologically possible or really not easily and realistically possible today, but I think gives a nice glimpse of what we might call audio 3.0 in museums. We'll see if we can get that. I can even just go to YouTube if that's easier. While she's doing that, any kind of initial comments or responses to kind of what I'm putting out there, some basic premises? My co-presenters here. There we go. Okay, so just. I don't want to waste a lot of time searching for this. So I'm just going to describe this video to you rather than I'm just impatient. Unfortunately, I have not.
The sculpture you were looking at drew ridicule and shame when the artist first exhibited it in 1913. Nearly a century later, Symphony No. 1 is considered a pivotal example of abstract sculpture. Your immediate reaction might be to dismiss this work, just as your boss dismissed you after making what anyone would agree was an honest mistake. But if you allow yourself to really look at this piece, you'll see that it awakens all senses simultaneously. Remember the labored walk of a man in the subway and the steady rhythm of the train. Then the taste of all your lips together with the softness of the blanket and the sound of your friend's laughter. Life is a constant clashing and colliding of perceptions, Frank. And maybe this is what the artist, Baron Rossinet, tried to convey in his work, but at the time it was so experimental and unappreciated that the artist took a sculpture similar to the one you're looking at and threw it into the river Seine. He was so discouraged that he wanted the water to swallow up and corrode his vision. But later he went back and recovered his work. Why? Because somewhere in the back of his mind he had a lingering hope that someday someone would feel what he felt, see what he saw.
Okay, as I said, particularly the traditional audio tour device that you see the visitor to MoMA using there is not capable of that level of prescience, let alone personalization. But I found it a really interesting and a beautiful video, really. I still love watching it. I've been using it as an example for quite a long time now. Precisely because it really focuses on how can we create content and experiences that really directly relate the visitor's own knowledge, interest, emotional state even, to what they're seeing and make a very personal relevance there. So again, it's about the content rather than the technology. Sorry, I'm so cat-handed with a PC. Start making snarky comments about PCs, but I won't do that. Okay, so what I find really powerful about mobile is that it is unique, I would argue, as a technology in its ability to mix the very personal. As you pointed out earlier, mobile is something that the majority of museum audiences now experience on their own devices on a daily basis. And these are devices that they carry close to their bodies. As Jonathan Finkelstein from Learning Times pointed out, when we're listening to an audio tour, we're essentially allowing the museum to whisper in our ears. And that's a very intimate position. You know, there are not many people we let get close enough to whisper in our ears. If we're using our own personal devices to access that museum content, then that's the same device that holds all of our contacts, photos of our children, our personal emails, our social and our professional networks. So the museum is able to occupy a position that's very intimate and very privileged with respect to the visitor. And so that's obviously a position of power that absolutely must not be abused. There's a seat right here if you'd like to grab it. At the same time, mobile is incredibly social, right? I mean, these are the devices that we use to access Facebook, to make our professional contacts, to check in, update our profile on LinkedIn. So it's almost, I mean, it probably is unique that we can intersect through mobile technologies and the content and experiences designed for them, this incredibly intimate and personal experience with a very public and a social one. At the same time, mobile is very disruptive. I mean, we've seen, you know, its role in the Arab Spring, among other major public protests. At the Smithsonian, where I worked until very recently, we had an exhibition called Hide Seek at the National Portrait Gallery. And it included a video by David Wojnarowicz. And the video garnered some protests, some objections from some conservative and religious right-wing groups in the U.S. The secretary of the Smithsonian decided that it was distracting from the rest of the art in the exhibition, and actually, against the protests of the curators of the exhibition, he had that video removed from the exhibition. So some enterprising protesters got a copy of the artist's work, loaded it onto an iPad, and wore it into the gallery, for which they were physically removed. One of the darker moments in Smithsonian public relations, I would say. So, you know, we have to be ready as well for the disruptive power of mobile for both good and perhaps more challenging uses. Fundamentally, I like to think of mobile as social media. And actually, our colleagues who are here from Easy Travel and Renee Mies in particular started talking to me about this day before yesterday, I think, and then it was presented yesterday in the Mobile Parade. This idea that you know, what's important about a story, or what makes a story powerful, is that it gets transmitted, that it gets passed on. And I think that's an interesting take on this idea of mobile as social media. That in some ways, perhaps when we think about the content and experience design, we need to think about its transmissibility above all things. You know, I don't really want to talk about viral content and that kind of marketing or advertising effect, but more the sense of a good story. You hear a great joke, a great story, a really interesting fact. What do you want to do? You want to share it. You want to pass it on. And that's really the deepest potential and power of mobile that museums can tap. We can think of the museum, of course, today as existing on a number of platforms, right? So it's no longer, I think everybody gets that, it's no longer just what's within the four walls of the building, the physical artifacts, but it's the website, it's the blog, it's what you find on YouTube, it's what you find on Flickr. And so the museum has been described as a multi-platform entity now. And I think, unfortunately, what we've seen happen with a lot of social media in museums, that nonetheless those platforms are still being managed from the center in what we might call a hub and spoke structure, where even though the technology might be fancy and new, fundamentally the museum's not behaving very differently from the analog days, where they wrote the message, they decided how it was going to be disseminated, and they totally controlled that flow of information. So quite often the way mobile and other social media platforms are used today is we take the same message that we've put on the signage in the museum, we've put in the catalog, we've put in the brochures, we've sent in a press release, and we just blog it, tweet it, Maybe we make a video about it and put it on YouTube. So we're just sending out the same message. We're not really listening. And we're hoping maybe it'll get retweeted. Maybe that the extent and the reach of that message will grow, but we're not really changing the flow of information, the shape of the conversation, or the nature of who has power, who has control over speaking in that system. What I think mobile can help us do is actually change that power structure significantly, because today's mobile devices, these smartphones, in contrast to the early broadcast mobile devices that we've seen earlier, allow us to listen as well as to speak. And so that starts to change the flow of information and therefore the flow of power in the museum system. That's radical, that's transformative. That starts to change the nature of the business of museums and how we do it and how we relate with our audiences. So elsewhere I've talked about this as the museum as a distributed network. That instead of thinking of it as a hub and spoke, museum controlling the message, distributing it out from a central point, it's really more about a three-dimensional network of nodes. Perhaps the museum is, in a sense, a privileged node in that network, but we're just one of many. And what's great about distributed networks, as the military inventors of the World Wide Web will tell you, is that you can't get rid of it from a direct blast at any one point, right? So we might take the museum offline. Its website's gone, its blog's gone, social media platforms are gone, but the content's still out there in this ecosystem. And it can circulate whether there's anyone from the museum staff involved or not. That, again, is a very radical new way of thinking about museums, as in a sense existing independent of paid staff. So Chris Anderson who's the editor of Wired magazine, came to the Smithsonian a number of years ago and gave a wonderful talk, which, as you can see, continues to inspire my work 5 years later. And he talked about taking the museum from we do the talking, from we help you do the talking. So again, that's another way of thinking about that visual structure I was illustrating, from hub and spoke to distributed network. Max Anderson, who's the director of the Dallas Museum of Art, has described this as going from interpretation to conversation. So I talked a little bit about this earlier, about the early structure of audio content and mobile experiences in museums as being really conditioned by the technology as these linear, what we might call soundtracks. So you think about the soundtrack of a film or downloading the soundtrack as an album and listening to it in a kind of a linear thing. And the kind of the stops or the moments where we stopped in our museum visit to look at an object were kind of strung along this linear route like little pearls of wisdom. But in some ways, the magic of that mobile experience happened in the interstitial spaces, happened in between those stops. Because in the early linear tour, you could use that space between painting and statue or between exhibits to give background information as well as navigational information, to kind of tell the details that bring the story to life, not just the information about the exhibit. And so the problem, of course, with that, I mean, that was a very rich and potentially immersive experience when it was done well, but it was so easy to get lost, right? You'd lose your place in that cassette tape, and you couldn't find your way back easily. So some people would just, kind of peel off, say, okay, I've had enough of this. It's too much trouble to get back into it. So those random access devices that I described with the keypads were supposed to liberate us from this forced march through the museum and to allow us to go wherever we want, hear whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted. But in a sense, what's important is we lost what was in between. We lost the ability to connect those dots and create an immersive experience until the screen-based device came out. Now, this interface no longer exists, sadly. This was the first interface of Art Babel, which is a public mobile platform designed for art videos. It was created by the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and it is still online. And it really was a kind of a precursor to what's commonplace in YouTube now, where you have the soundtrack of the video, which is a linear bar there across the bottom, is marked, I don't know if you can see, with these kind of vertical little thin blue lines. Each of those corresponds to an annotation, a note, which can give more information about what is being discussed in the video at that moment. So in this case, the artist William Christenberry is talking about his photography, and when he talks about having photographed a particular place, you could jump off there, go to a Google map, see photographs that he took in that place. So it was a very alinear way of interacting with an essentially linear medium, which is video. And I think in some ways this interface remains my ideal interface for mobile in museums, because it allows us to have both those soundtracks. Sometimes people come to museums and they really do just want to be taken by the hand and led and told a story and be immersed in an experience. And sometimes something catches their eye, they want to jump off that linear track, go deeper, learn more, or change the order of the visit completely. This kind of an interface permits that. Sadly, at the time it came out, it was built in Flash, which of course wouldn't work on iOS devices. So I have yet to actually see this realized in a mobile app. But, and this will be my kind of last example for handing over to my colleagues to look at some of theirs as well. This is probably the most transformative mobile experience I've ever had in a museum context. And I've been working with mobile in museums since the year 2000, and I have taken hundreds, if not thousands, of mobile tours and mobile apps. This one was created by the artist Halsey Burgund, and it's an app that's called Scapes. It's actually an artwork. And it was an installation at the De Cordova Sculpture Park, which is no longer there. So although you can download the app and use it in an archived form, you can't quite have the exact experience anymore, unfortunately, that I had, although I'm really hoping somebody will commission Halsey to reinstall it. When I first heard about this project, I'll have to confess I was very, very skeptical. The idea is, through this app, the artist is crowdsourcing audio content about the sculptures in the park. Now, I actually have a PhD in American art based on sculpture, and I really was very skeptical that all these visitors to the park who don't have my level of study in sculpture or knowledge of art history could really tell me anything that I would find very interesting about the artworks. I know this is a very snobbish position to take. Probably I'm fundamentally a snob, but I, like so many people, was really skeptical about the quality of what could be crowdsourced. And I'll have to tell you, I came away from it completely transformed in my sense of what crowdsourcing can do and what mobile can do. So let me just show you a little video of the experience, and then I think I will try to explain to you what I think happened there and what made it so powerful.
Escape's piece is, I think of it as a musical composition. It is a spatially related musical composition. And the volumes of those parts fade up and down depending on how close you are to where the center of that particular musical part is.
Okay, let's walk. Music is changing now.
Yeah, we get these bells more towards the entrance of the museum. Is more of a sort of melodic part, very slow melody. All the music is based on some of the topographic characteristics of the park itself.
I know that is.
Oh, there's some voices.
Hey, there goes the chipmunk.
Right where I'm standing, some guy saw a chipmunk.
There goes the chipmunk again.
Which could have been a chipmunk from 2 weeks ago.
Yes, it could have, absolutely, which I think is kind of fun to think about where that chipmunk is right now.
sitting inside this glass sculpture. The acoustics are very fun.
Oh, wow. So that guy went and did this. They stuck their head into this open glass dome that's part of the structure, and these are the acoustics he was talking about. And now I'm doing it too.
You might not have done that otherwise.
I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have.
Really hurt me. I'm going to be a soldier. I'm very scared, pretty excited. Being here is pretty peaceful, I guess, compared to what I'm about to go through. Good luck to me.
Oh, wow. Is this raining?
That's rain.
Something must have been raining.
And they recorded the rain and left it here for us.
It's not raining though, I guess.
No.
So if you want to make your own recording.
Okay, I'm looking at this sculpture. It looks like a piece of like HVAC ductwork from a building, but it kind of twists in a way that reminds me of like a lower intestine. We hit stop.
You can stop and we can listen to it back.
Okay, I'm looking at this sculpture. It looks like a piece of, there I am, like HVAC ductwork. There were these three elements going on simultaneously. There was the music, there was the rain from God knows when that was recorded, not on a day like today, and then there's me.
From just a few minutes ago.
Really peaceful garden. The thing I think would help it would be a few one of those type of fish that are catfish.
Okay, so as you see, when I heard about this at first, I thought about it through the paradigm of the traditional audio tour, which provides interpretive content, some sort of an educational experience. If I can make this go away. And what I discovered when I got there was a very different kind of, very different kind of experience, which was really based much more on what the visitors were seeing. Now, each of those audio recordings was geotagged at the moment and the location where it was recorded. And so basically what you do to trigger those is you walk across the spot where a recording was made in the past. So you're triggering with your body somebody else's memory. And the app asks you questions. Some of them are very basic and very simple. For example, look up, what do you see? Or send a message to someone who's not here but who you wish were here. Or ask a question for someone who will come after you. So it didn't expect any art historical knowledge or interpretive skill. It was really about the visitor, about you. What are you experiencing this moment? What are you noticing? Let's see. So what Halsey Burgun did, and I don't think it's in the least surprising that it's an artist who led us to this innovation in thinking about mobile experience design, is what in a museum, traditional audio tour museum context would be called stops, become soundtracks. Because if I stand in this location long enough, the app just keeps playing through all the recordings that were made at my location or just around me. So I can stand there and go deeper for as long as I would like. The soundtracks are no longer linear, though. I can go anywhere I want, visit the sculptures in any order I want. What in a traditional audio tour is a broadcast or a narrowcast of information actually becomes a conversation. because I, as a visitor, can leave my responses and then I can hear previous visitors' responses to even earlier visitors. And that conversation is asynchronous, right? So it can unfold over the entire life of the exhibition. And finally, the body is the interface. It's not a keypad, it's not a map, it's not a QR code. It's my own body that's unleashing the audio, as it were. And I can't say that, you know, I've done this in an app that I've kind of project managed or designed or led, but I continue to find it a very inspiring approach. And it certainly, as I said, transformed the way that I thought about crowdsourcing. So I wanted to share it with you today. And we can come back, and I will talk a little bit more later on, if there's time and if there's interest, about how we went on at the Smithsonian to use this open source platform that the app is built on to build some other crowdsourcing apps and experiences. But I really just kind of want to leave you with this idea that when we think about mobile, it's not really finally or ultimately about the technology, that we can do all sorts of interesting things with the content that go way beyond what we've kind of been conditioned since the 1950s to think of as mobile in museums. And actually, I just want to echo again the comment that you made at the very beginning, that above all, what we need to be doing is creating mobile experiences in museums that are congruent with, that leverage our visitors' already natural mobile habits. Because mobile is now diffuse enough, at least in the West, that just about everybody's had a mobile experience. And if we can work within their natural ways of using their mobile devices, I think we've got a much more powerful experience and a much quicker route to adoption. You know, one of the problems that I think mobile has in museums is it's actually not used by very many of our visitors. Now, there are exceptions. A blockbuster exhibition, your one chance to see the Monet exhibition, you've already paid $25 for your ticket, you're probably happy to shell out another $5 or $8 for the audio tour to make sure you get every minute out of that experience and out of the money and the effort you've spent to go to it. When we start talking about permanent collections, the typical standard take-up rate is below 10, and in most cases below 5% of the visitors use the audio tour. Again, that can be different in particularly European contexts where there are a lot of people who don't speak the language. It can be different if the audio tour is free. For example, MoMA, I believe, has higher than 40% take-up rate. They do an amazing job marketing, pushing the use of that device, and the provision of the devices and the content is sponsored by Bloomberg, so it can be absolutely free and multilingual for everybody. So there are exceptions, but I would argue they kind of prove this rule that there seems to be, or to have been at least until now, a glass ceiling on mobile use by museum visitors. I do not know why, and that's one of the questions I'd love to talk with you all about today. Is it because so many, frankly, of those mobile tours are crap? They're boring, and you take one and you never take another one. Is it because we build them and we expect the people to come? We don't put up signage. We don't train our staff in how to distribute them. The staff are scared of these devices because they're all volunteers who've never held a smartphone, and so they hide it under the table. Is that why they're not being used? Or is it because that traditional audio tour experience, although very important to, you know, a small but not insignificant percentage of our visitors, is just not how people use mobile today? Maybe it's not how they learned ever. So that's where I'd like to see mobile go in museums, is asking that question and thinking, what can we learn from how people use mobile today to build mobile experiences that really do transform the nature of the museum experience, and in fact transform the museum itself. Turn it from a central out hub and spoke model of power and of conversational control to a distributed network, or even, and this is the kind of strategy that I'm starting to work on for the Baltimore Museum of Art, where I'll be starting work in early March, what if we think about, what if we use mobile to help us transform the museum into a pervasive presence? And by pervasive, I mean in the sense of pervasive computing, that it's everyone, that it's everywhere. It's absolutely liberated from any sense of place, which does not mean that place becomes irrelevant. In a funny way, I think the future of mobile takes us back to an even greater importance of where you are when we think about context-specific and personalized experiences. So that's where I am with mobile right now, and I'll now hand over to my colleagues to talk about what they think of as mobile and give you their own insights. Let me just put this in.